Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony, and today, to my American viewers, I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. Let's jump in. And we begin as we usually do with the economy. Chinese stocks popped yesterday, Wednesday afternoon, as rumors spread online about so-called consumer or consumption stimulus. The chatter is that the China Economic Work Council, which usually takes place in mid-December, will occur in early December, with further speculation that the fiscal deficit will be expanded from 2024's 3% to 4.5%. China's CSI 300 index closed 1.7% higher, posting its biggest gain in 3 weeks, with technology stocks rising the most. The risk-on mood was also evident in Hong Kong, where a gauge of Chinese stocks rallied 2.6%. The sudden rebound confounded some market watchers in the West, especially as the gains came in the wake of Trump's threat of additional tariffs and cabinet appointments that underscored his trade agenda, which we will cover soon. Are the rumors true? Of course, it's hard to say, we'll find out in a few weeks, but it does seem that China's terrible consumption is increasingly front and center in policymakers' minds. Zhu Min, former Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and former Deputy Governor of the People's Bank of China, the country's central bank, speaking at the 2024 US-China People's Dialogue in Beijing this week, explained that China is seeking to increase the share of consumption in GDP to more than half within the next decade in order to achieve a smooth transition in growth engines. He added that the Chinese economy now faces challenges on both external and domestic fronts, ranging from low global economic growth and sluggish world trade to real estate oversupply and local government debt issues. Adding, quote, "If China can increase the share of consumption in GDP from 48% to 58% in 10 years, that would be a significant achievement. It's not easy, but the government is determined to make it happen." End quote. This is perhaps one of the most frank admissions of the serious structural issues facing policymakers and Beijing leadership from such a high-ranking official. This line, however, provoked a response from Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis, who we often quote here on China Update, who expressed in response to Zhu today, quote, "I'm not sure where his 48% comes from. Last year, according to National Bureau of Statistics data, household consumption was 37% of GDP and total consumption was 53%. But let's assume that China is indeed able to raise total consumption by 10 percentage points in the next 10 years. This won't be easy. The total consumption share of GDP rose from 49% in 2010, when it bottomed out, to 56% in 2019, before COVID struck. And Zhu is proposing a much greater change in much less time. But if China pulls it off, will this solve the problem? Not really. Even if China has 10 years to adjust, which I doubt, a 10 percentage point increase in China's consumption share of GDP to 63% will still leave it with among the lowest consumption shares of GDP of any large economy. The global average is around 74 to 75%. The real problem is that raising the consumption share of GDP means, by definition, reducing the investment in trade surplus shares of GDP. It also means reducing the government and business shares to accommodate the rise in the household share. Beijing doesn't seem willing to impose the major income transfers needed to raise the consumption growth rate to 7%, and it doesn't seem politically capable of accepting GDP growth rates below 4%. Wishful thinking aside, this makes it impossible for China to raise the consumption share of GDP by 10 percentage points in 10 years. This, by the way, is just arithmetic. The numbers just don't work. This doesn't mean, however, that China won't rebalance. Imbalances are always eventually resolved, especially those as deep as China's. The point, however, is that if the rebalancing process isn't planned for and controlled, it will happen anyway, but in an unplanned and disruptive way, the way the US did in the 1930s. End quote. Next up, US-China trade. US President-elect Donald Trump has nominated Jamieson Greer to head the office of the US Trade Representative. Greer was Chief of Staff to Robert Lighthizer during the first Trump administration. Greer has said publicly that he shares Lighthizer's views about trade and tariffs with China. In his May testimony before the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission, Greer provided a roadmap for the policies the new administration might pursue, including action to prevent Chinese companies from relocating to other countries to dodge US tariffs. It increasingly looks like there will be no significant empowered role for Lighthizer at the start of the next Trump administration. Analysts are now waiting to see who will be appointed the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, who oversees the BIS, the body that manages the flow of advanced technology like semiconductors to the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, in a note published yesterday titled "Bracing for a Storm," J.P. Morgan economists led by Jahangir Aziz say emerging economies will take a knock from Trump's pledges for higher trade tariffs, but, quote, expect trade policy toward China to shift the earliest and materially, end quote, and, quote, needless to say, China would be the worst affected, end quote. According to the note, JP Morgan is now expecting an average effective tariff of 60% on China, up from the current 20%. The note says that this would definitely hurt China's 2025 economic prospects, and the American bank changed their forecast to 3.9% from 4.8% based on such tariffs. Others have said 60% tariffs could reduce growth to 2.5%. The note from JP Morgan also said that China could see its currency, the RMB, the yuan, depreciate by as much as 10 to 15% in the near term. Next up, we have one more update to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, I have a big favor to ask. That is just to hit the like button, and if you have not done so already and you'd think you'd watch another one of these episodes, subscribe and hit the bell notification. Sharing the episode is a tremendous help. These three things tell the algorithm that this is a real channel worth sharing. More growth means that eventually I can move into doing these episodes full-time as my full-time job in business, which means more hours put into these every day, higher quality and more informative episodes for you all going forward. The current roadmap is that if the channel gets to 100,000 subscribers, this should be enough of a threshold to leave my job and do this work full-time. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below. I rely primarily on subscriber support to keep going as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, on Tuesday, Chinese technology national champion Huawei introduced its new flagship smartphones, the Mate 70 series and foldable Mate X6, featuring major performance upgrades, advanced AI capabilities, and enhanced satellite communication. This all despite years of US sanctions on the company. The chips used by Huawei smartphones have become a symbol of the struggle between China and the United States for control over advanced technology. Policymakers in Washington have spent years trying to prevent Chinese companies from being able to make the kind of chip Huawei uses in its Mate phones. But Huawei has pressed ahead, and the phone has burnished its image as a national leader, triumphant in the face of US restrictions, in the eyes of nationalistic Chinese consumers. Alongside these phones, Huawei unveiled a premium smartwatch, tablets, and headphones. Despite rising memory costs, Huawei has maintained competitive pricing domestically. This is likely due to robust state subsidies, however. Huawei's Harmony OS Next, unveiled last month, is fully independent of Android, boasting 15,000 native apps. This aligns with the company's push to counter US sanctions and regain its high-end market share. In the third quarter, Huawei captured 16.8% of China's smartphone market, ranking second in shipments and increasing its premium segment share to 30.7%. However, Huawei's planned rollout of Harmony OS Next on all its devices next year will also be challenging, given the limited pool of compatible apps currently, according to Rich Bishop, CEO of App in China, which publishes international software in China, who expressed yesterday, quote, if a user isn't able to access even one app that they use on a regular basis, then this is likely to put them off from buying the next device. Users will also face substantial challenges when traveling abroad, where the vast majority of apps that they'll need to use will not be available on Next. End quote. Starting at $760, the price of the Mate 70 is meant to compete with the iPhone in China. Harmony OS Next allows phones to connect with Huawei's other products, electric cars, smart speakers, and watches. The brand says its robust ecosystem and focus on cutting-edge technology are key to its growing appeal in China. Some commentators have also pointed to Chinese nationalism as a factor as well. Market analysts expect Huawei to see potential shipments exceeding 10 million units in 2025, but the commercial success for the Mate 70 could depend on Huawei's ability to secure a steady supply of chips. The company relied on the Chinese Chinese chipmaker SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, to make the chips in the Mate 60 Pro. SMIC, which is partly state-owned, is the only maker of advanced chips in China. Laura Chung, a senior analyst at Isai Research, a market research company, told clients in a note this week that SMIC has strained to make enough chips for Huawei. Even though production for some parts in Huawei's latest phones began in July, the Mate 70 has not gone on sale until now because it was challenging for Huawei to acquire enough chips. However, on this topic of chips and US restrictions on semiconductors, today, veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed, quote, "It looks like the Commerce Department did not release the long overdue updates to the October 7 semiconductor controls before Thanksgiving. I am now hearing they will come out on Monday. And they are a big win for the semiconductor equipment manufacturers, who were able to successfully argue that because the Biden administration failed to get the Dutch and Japanese governments on board with certain additional restrictions, that it would be unfair to just target US firms. I'm also hearing that they will still be able to sell to Huawei's network of fabs, which if correct, may cause some upset in the US Congress. So while the government will likely push hard on claims of tough on China, and there will be condemnations from China, in fact, they may turn out to be even weaker and more loophole-riddled than expected." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.